right. Well, I think we should probably go ahead and get going. Welcome, everyone, to the P4 Technical Steering Team meeting for April 2025. It's not held on April 1st, so no jokes today. Let's see. Let me just so the first item that I put on here, I put it on. I moved it first from a lot of these topics are things we've touched on in past months, and they're kind of updates, mostly minor updates on various topics. For the Linux Foundation review of software licenses in our P4Lang projects, I had some slides that I was planning to present and just have hopefully some little bit, at least a little bit of discussion on getting folks' feedback on one possible approach to move forward on this. Um, I still haven't consulted with an intellectual property lawyer from Linux Foundation, but I did have a sort of the focus of my questions today is not so much legal as it is sort of technical, operational questions of, hey, if we did things this way, does that seem like a reasonable workflow for people that have to deal with committing to the P4Lang projects? If there's some additional, lint type tools that check for licenses and copyrights on files and things like that. So uh, I have way more slides than just that to kind of motivate one particular choice. So we might want to touch on some of the other topics first before coming back to this one, the slides, since they might take a while. Um, so with that, let me move on. Let me come back to the Linux Foundation review of software licenses topic later and those slides. I hope to come back to it at least no more than halfway through, since I suspect those slides might take a good 10, 15 minutes to get through. Uh, Welcome, Hari. Good to see you.
Hey,
So let me move on to the other ones. I think many of the other topics might be shorter, but let's find out. In the past, we've mentioned that P4.org is looking to help with CI/CD tasks. In particular, I've forgotten his Stefan. What is Virios Google's real life name?
Victor.
Victor
Victor
Rios. Yes,
Rios.
Victor Rios.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, senior moment on my part. Victor Rios has been asking recently about, some of our CI stuff that we have in very like Docker files and things like that we have.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because inside of Google, this happens all the time. We just use LDAPs to refer to each other, and people don't know the real name. So it's a common problem.
Oh, I understand perfectly. Yeah, yeah. It becomes another name for you. It becomes your nickname. I'm glad you know his real name. I knew it. I just couldn't draw it up right now. Um, so basically, I answered him with, we have been. I brought this up in the P4 Governance Board meeting recently, and the P4 Governance Board is open to the idea of spending, a reasonable but not huge amount of money on paying somebody to take on, sort of updating and maintaining CI tasks on P4Lang projects. Maybe, ideally not just updating what we have, but also maybe like taking on tasks like producing, apt-get and yum installable packages of precompiled stuff, which we've had in various forms in the past, created by volunteers, but have kind of, as those volunteers have gone on to other projects, they kind of don't get updated anymore, and unless another volunteer takes them up. So if we have somebody paid part-time to do that, then hopefully we could, have them updated as long as that person were being paid, and ideally even longer if they set up things that volunteers could then take on. So Fabian has reached out to a person that he talked with about this that has worked on the Haskell programming language doing similar things and was interested in looking into the P4Lang project. I will ping Fabian to see if that person that he's communicated with has responded. Um, at the P4 governance board, Intel said that they might volunteer an engineer to work on this, but I will wait for the next governance board meeting next week, hopefully to find an update on that. I haven't heard from anybody until volunteering for that work, so I'm not sure if that's going to come through or not. So maybe finding someone else would be the best approach going forward. That said, if anybody here is interested in doing this, uh, I mean, part of this is like realizing that I think most people that's not what they want to spend their time on P4Lang projects working on. It's a side, you know, keep the trains running kind of approach. So I understand if not trying to pressure anybody into taking on this kind of thing full time. So it'd be nice to have somebody that can set something up better than what we've got now. So anyway, only minor updates there. If anybody has any leads on somebody interested in doing that kind of work that might be willing to do it as a paid part-time contractor, they think would be good, feel free to let us know. But we do have at least one lead already that Fabian's following up with. Let's see. Uh, Denise has been, let's see, Denise, I think we have one new official member of p4.org, which is Excite Labs since maybe last month. Is it the
Yep,
last month?
correct.
Okay. So they've got some welcome messages that you're working on, but you've also mentioned in the past, yeah, having each of the working groups do sort of like a maybe once a quarter update. I think the best choice for this, I know I mentioned the architecture working group, but actually I tried to mention the architecture working group as maybe not the best choice, so the one that would go last. So I will be following up with the language design work group co-chairs. I didn't send out the email yesterday, but I'll send out the email today to maybe get, I think that'll be a good choice with the most technical meat for the next, for this quarter to go. So except for that, no updates there other than I think the language design work group has probably got the most technical uh, meat to talk about recently. Billy, I think I saw you joined. Is Billy still here?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to give an
Okay.
update on the Google Summer of Code status?
Yeah, so I think we are approaching the deadline for the contributor application. And I think so far we have received some good applications. From my side, I know two good candidates for two of the projects. And I think David uh, might know more from his side.
Okay.
Yes, so I think that regarding to the project within, let's say, the name of P4 Research, they have three or four people that applied, but I don't know any other details about that. And regarding the project that I'm mentoring, I'll receive two project proposal. So that's it from my side. I would say that for the NS3 project, I think that no one is going to submit because it seems that the student cannot let's say, put an effort on that, or the candidates that present themselves were not motivated to send a proposal. So this is more or less the situation.
Okay, so then based on this information, I think ultimately we might have 4 or 5 projects in our shortlist that we send to Google to decide
Yeah.
how many we get.
Just for comparison, how many did we have last year?
4.
Okay. And we had 4 accepted last year.
Yeah.
Okay. So keeping our fingers crossed, we might get 4 or 5 this year as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the update. Any other notes on that?
A little attendance thing. Dr. Ruffy has materialized from Germany.
Oh,
So you might check him
excellent.
Hello, hello.
Are you wearing your hat?
Hello.
I am not. I couldn't carry it to Germany.
Okay. All right.
It was too big.
Wait, which ad? What am I missing?
Oh, he I don't know how widely he would like the photo published, but apparently it's
Oh,
tradition in some European doctoral programs to
yes.
create a hat for people finishing their doctorates.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I know about this. Okay.
Yeah, so I have a German friend. He made me a hat as a surprise.
Very nice. Congrats.
Thank you.
Oh, since you've joined late, Fabian, I mentioned just recently, you reached out to somebody in email about a possible candidate that would be willing to work on CI/CD tasks that's done it for the Haskell before. I don't know if you've heard back from them since then or if it was still tentative.
So yeah, I mean, it was a while ago, 2 months or so, I think. They were still open to the idea of doing part-time work.
Okay.
So a day or so.
So yeah, so I mentioned I did someone at Intel did volunteer some time for that, or a manager volunteered and said, I'll have somebody reach out to you, but I haven't heard from them. So if they don't reach out in the next couple of weeks or so, I think we should probably, I'll propose to the governance board that we go for paying somebody just so we can get moving on it.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for the Google Summer of Code update. The 2025 P4 workshop. The proposal we've talked about in the past and has been proposed to the governance board is that we have this first choice. It sounds like we would be like to have this physically co-located with the OCP Global Summit, October 14th through 16th in San Jose. Perhaps as day 0, October 13th, the day before the main 3 days of it. But we've also found that perhaps if our application is accepted, so first of all, we have to make an application to be a one-day workshop that's part of OCP Global Summit. They might say no, we've chosen some other set of workshops to be co-located and there's no room for you. And we won't find that out until sometime in May. But if they accept us, it's likely will be the first, either October 13th or 14th are the most likely days we believe we would be held. And then our fallback position, if we are not accepted to be on that site physically, would be to do it October 13th somewhere in San Jose, so that if people want to come in for OCP Global Summit and the P4 workshop, they can have a single trip to do both. So still not decided whether we're co-located with OCP Global Summit. We'll have to wait until May for that.
Hey, one more thing I was going to mention, Andy, is we do potentially have the opportunity. We're going to be putting in an application to actually host a booth on the exhibit floor, and there's no fee for doing that. Obviously, it's the same thing again, first come, first serve. So we don't know if we would get selected, but we would, if we are selected, need to have some volunteers to staff that booth and talk about P4.
Yep. I would, and I'll just mention I'd be happy to volunteer at least, a day of time as we would need somebody all 3 days ideally.
I'm not sure what days exactly the exhibit will be. I don't know if it's all 3 days or it may just be 2 days. I couldn't tell you.
Okay. So yeah, I'd be happy to volunteer for at least part of that time, maybe not the whole time.
Great.
Andy, have you talked to anyone at Oxide or Excite Labs about possibly helping promote at OCP?
I have not specifically about OCP now.
So
That's
Excite
question.
Labs recently did a big press release. I think maybe in conjunction with one of the trade shows. And they
You might have read a quote from a certain Andy Fingerhut in that press release, if it's the same one I'm thinking of.
But I didn't write the press release. Only that I didn't even write that quote. I approved the quote. I didn't actually write it even.
Okay, got it. Anyway, they might be bullish on helping, because they have a vested interest in doing some self-promotion and they're doing some really cool things, right? So
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the note.
I could inject some new enthusiasm, the idea of an ISA, a public ISA for, programmable switch and how it relates to P4.
Yeah, good. I mean, we'll definitely be suggesting that they submit a talk or maybe invite them for a talk for the workshop, I think, but
Cool.
other things related to OCP would be good too. Denise, would you mind? I don't know if you can help take a note of that to track approaching them about that.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely be talking to folks in the Dash project about that since they're, but any other companies or organizations that are more involved with OCP activities, or at least you'll have some activity with we'd love to hear about them if they have any P4 overlap interest at all. So
Yeah,
thanks
if
for
you
that,
want to
Chris.
contact X-Site, I would say Ted Weatherford would be the good point of contact, right?
Yep. Yeah, I actually have, because of that quote, I actually did, and then approval, I have actually talked with Ted Weatherford and Eric Falone at
Yeah,
Site
yeah,
Labs.
both X and Tel.
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
no, exciting stuff going on there. Definitely keeping an eye on what they're doing. Let me think. Oh, so we have talked with a person about being a program committee chair for the P4 workshop. I don't want to out them yet until that's finalized, but hopefully that'll be finalized soon, and we'll help select they can help select a co-chair. Um, but I'm excited that that will be announced soon. Anything else on the P4 workshop folks have questions about, comments?
I just want to kind of plus one what Chris was saying, and maybe expand the scope a little bit. So, you know, co-locating the workshop with OCP is a kind of different kind of event. I think it's really great to try something different than sort of an academic-ish workshop at Stanford like we've done, or, you know, Google and Intel have hosted the past few years, but it still kind of feels like, you know, not so much of an industry trade show, more of a kind of scientific workshop. I don't want to lose the scientific part, of course. Nobody wants to lose the scientific part, but I think finding ways to raise the visibility of P4 in the industry is a good thing. And OCP is a community that a lot of people are working in other contexts, and just seems like, you know, they're kind of well aligned with the P4 community. It's a little more expensive and it'll take some more organization on our part to kind of find the synergies with OCP. So I guess the ask from this group is anyone who's working on an OCP project, or, you know, things that people in that community work on, if there's a P4 angle, we'd love to hear it and we'd love to help. I mean, the dream would be that there's kind of lots of synergies. So, you know, people from other tracks coming to the P4 workshop, people from the P4 workshop going to other tracks. Of course, the booth that Denise mentioned would give us some visibility in the expo, and, you know, there may also be the possibility of some kind of keynote or plenary talk in the main track, but that's still being discussed. But, you know, I think basically, like, the grant experiment is exciting, but to get the most out of it, we need to find these connections. There's pretty obvious ones around Sonic-SAI. But I guess if people know of other ones, that it would be helpful to let Andy know, and then we can try to, you know, curate some more content and interactions in that direction.
Yes, definitely. Please do that. Also, I mean, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but if you were thinking of submitting a talk for the P4 workshop, or a demo, or a poster, you know, consider also submitting something to OCP Global Summit if you think there's something that would be of interest to that, whether it's the same topic or a related one.
Has anyone talked to anyone in the Silicon One program at Cisco about their P4?
I haven't yet. I mean, I have definitely talked to them a little bit, but as far as specifically for the OCP Global Summit, what plans Cisco might already have, I haven't yet asked about that, but I will.
And then, you know, the Intel IPU project, you know, P4 based, and they also have P4 DPDK, which is still pretty vigorous. And that, you know, I think both of those are pretty exciting. And then Pensando or AMD with their P4 based DPU as well. I mean, we've still got some viable commercial projects, but nothing's been opened up quite like Tofino was, you know, in terms of, let's say, the way it was publicized, and the way people, you know, did uptake on that. In terms of, it seems like on the DPUs, it's a little more, you know, I won't say closed, but not as apparent. You know, the SDKs you have to get under EULAs and very selectively, etc. But that could change. You know, so I think those commercial ASICs, you know, maybe we need to try to enlist them to build the wider enthusiasm.
So yeah, I mean, I just that reminds me of, I think I've mentioned before, there have been like pre-announcements of the possibility of an open source P4 compiler for Excite Labs Ethernet programmable Ethernet switch from Oxide, and that certainly would be an interesting thing to have. You know, that be open source so early in a project's lifetime, you know, a hardware device's lifetime. That's would be a first.
You know, Cisco's announced their smart switches that have AMD P4 DPUs in them and Silicon One ASIC, and so these are all P4 programmed. And seem like, and I think they probably have a commercial SKU, meaning, you know, part number that you could possibly order, not just contract it out for some particular customer. And, you know, those would be pretty cool platforms.
Yep. I mean, certainly the first thing you'll be able to buy is the baked in P4 code that you get with them, but
Yeah.
whether or not those ever become available in a more customer programmable scenario remains to be seen.
Yeah, I just don't think they have or have dedicated the customer support infrastructure. You know, like Barefoot basically did a world-class job of that, unlike anything I've ever seen before. And the other companies are more doing what they need to sell their specific, you know, end cases.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the questions on the P4 workshop? Let's see. Denise, I'm sorry, Michelle Roth added, she was looking at other public events. I had a longer list in past meetings, but there is an open source summit in Europe coming up August. These range of dates here in August in Amsterdam. Wanted to make sure that folks here are aware of it, especially folks in Europe, if they're interested in attending on behalf of P4 or just, you know, your own attending for any reason and or submitting a talk or other presentation there. Wanted to let folks know about it. And if you are interested in doing so, please let us know, just for, you know, contact's sake and communication's sake. We'd love to know. Let's see. David, do you want to give some update on the P4 Developer Days emails, flurry of emails you've been involved with recently?
Yeah, so basically, together with Fabian and Andy, we reach a European vendor of FPGA that is willing to, it's called Silicon, and from Denmark, and they are going to do a presentation of their smart NIC based on programmable in P4, and they are going to present it, I think, end of May. And then I reach the P4 Educational Working Group, and the student, one of the student of Mohammed Kabat, yes, exactly. Sorry, I was thinking how to pronounce it correctly. Is open to present his work about called Gigaflow. So we send him an email. You want to do a presentation. Probably is going to be at the beginning of June, but we're still waiting an answer from his side. He's also involved in the one of the project for the Google Summer of Code. So seems interesting. Let's see if and that's it, more or less.
I have one other update in that we do have a we do have a P4 Developer Day scheduled for May 6th. And this is a security related one on distributed denial of service attacks. So that will be the next one coming up. And Andy, I believe you're moderating that one.
Yes. And that one's already on the calendar, I think.
It is already on the calendar. And the other one that David mentioned is actually going to be on May 29th. So we have two coming up in May. The Silicon one is in May 29th.
Okay. And I think like maybe a week or two before the date, you'll be maybe sending out an email reminder as well for folks.
Yes, absolutely.
Because not everybody I follow the calendar, but not, I don't know if a lot of people do. So the email announcements are probably a better reminder.
Actually, a question for you. Would it be helpful for you as the moderator, I'm assuming, to try and get at least the slide deck prior so that you perhaps have a few discussion points prepared at the end?
We can certainly, yeah, reach out to them and ask if they think they'll
Yeah.
have presentation materials available beforehand.
was
It kind of depends on their schedule, whether they're doing it last minute or,
Yeah.
yeah, so certainly getting afterwards is great if they're willing, but before is always nice.
Yep. Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if I think of some questions on the fly, but yeah, nice to be prepared too.
Mhm. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, David, for all that, all those emails. That's great. And as usual, if anybody else has any ideas for anybody they know, companies, researchers, anyone that's might be interested in talking about this, um, the Silicon and the we're definitely reaching out on to say not just researchers or people with projects, but also maybe talking to vendors with products who'd be willing to talk about what their products are capable of doing at some public level as well. And so that's where Silicon came from, and we might be able to find some others like that too. So if you have any leads there, please let us know. All right. Any other, I would like to get into these slides, so, but don't let that stop you if you have any other agenda topics you'd like to toss in now that you might have thought about in the last half hour. Otherwise, I'll jump into that. Oh, let me jump back to the beginning here. So sorry, these are, you can tell I made these slides because they're walls of text, and I will not, sorry, I should learn to not put all my talking points on, type them in, but sometimes that helps me out. Just brief background, you know, we as software developers tend to, I tend to think of copyright and licenses as annoyances and putting hurdles in our way sometimes when we release code to the public. But I have done it a couple of times now at Intel, and now in reviewing this in the past couple of months, I think I've got a better mental handle on some of these questions than I did before, on things like license compatibility and other stuff. So I'll just try to briefly summarize a few points that might be blazingly obvious, but feel free to stop me and ask questions anytime. So most of our files in the P4Lang project, actually I've counted, it's about half of our files out of about 10,000 source files have a copyright notice. The other half actually don't right now. They don't even say copyright year by individual or company, but a bunch of them do. And then many of them have an explicit notice of what their license is, usually Apache 2 when it says so, but a bunch of them don't. And I'll argue later why I think it'd be nice to, if we could make sure that both of these things are explicit in every source file. And ideally even sort of, and one way to maintain that is to have an automatic tool to check it and maintain it. A minor note here that I put in, this is something I'll check with an intellectual property lawyer, but a bunch of our copyright notices say copyright 2013-present by Barefoot Networks. And I have been at Cisco where we've had automated tools in the past that, like, every time you commit and it's a new calendar year, it'll like some CI check will say, hey, you need to add another year to the copyright line, and here's a command you can run to update them all. I've never seen before Barefoot Networks copyright 23-present before that particular formulation, and I'll check with our intellectual property lawyer to be sure, but my guess is we should delete the -present and just make a copyright 2013. And we probably shouldn't introduce new things like that. But anyway, that's a minor aside.
Well, quick question. Can we not just delete the year entirely? I think I saw some note in some of these recommended documents to do that.
And so I will also check with the intellectual property lawyer from Linux Foundation on that question of deleting the year entirely. My only reservation, slight reservation or question that I will ask them, I will follow up and ask them if that's okay, is when you look at the Apache license, for example, it gives a boilerplate of here's how you attach the Apache license to a source file, and it says copyright year author as like a template or an example. So that's maybe just a recommendation that's not required or enforceable or needed. And so that's one of those questions I'll tack onto the intellectual property lawyer list that is not for the engineer to answer. But yeah, if we can say for future files, don't even have the year and just have it be implied by the year the file was added in Git tracking, that might be a reasonable choice as well. All right, so I mean, this isn't a big problem, but it is a long-term, nice, stable base to have if we could say, be very clear on all of our source files in the P4Lang project, what their copyright, who the copyright holder is, and what license it's released under. We do have a top-level license file in all the projects that mentions the Apache 2.0 license. That's good. That's a start. But we, as described in a couple later slides, there are at least a handful of files that I think shouldn't be Apache 2, and it should be explicit which ones those are and how to know which ones they are without having to guess. And but we do also want to make sure that one of the reasons that Apache 2 was chosen is we want to make sure that every source file that's compiled into a P4C executable is Apache 2 or other non-copyleft license, so that the binaries can be released under a proprietary license without obligating the company that uses the code to release the source code for it. That's been one of our goals, is to allow companies to release proprietary compilers P4 compilers if they wish. And also, secondarily, other things, there's other code that we have, like P4 runtime API server and client code that's in various repositories that we'd like to enable companies to release in proprietary binaries if they wish. So those should be Apache 2 licensed, or other permissive like BSD or MIT are permissive that way, not copyleft. Just as a note, I did some statistics across like our biggest repositories. We have about 4,000 out of 10,000 files have no copyright notice whatsoever, nor license. So this is the kind of thing that just it's easy to creep into this over 10 years if you don't pay attention to it without some automated way of checking you. So here's some exceptions, these either current exceptions that should remain exceptions, or in this case, this one's describing a current exception I think should be going away, and it is going away. At the time last November, when a software license specialist from Linux Foundation reviewed our repositories, they found a bunch of files that were marked confidential and proprietary. It was about 40 files at the time, and we have, with the copyright holder's approval, removed all those about 40 that existed at that time. There were about 40 or 50 new ones added in February. It'd be nice if we can have some CI check kind of thing that stops us from accidentally doing this in the future.
Is this due to the open sourcing of the Tofino toolchain?
The new ones in February were actually, well, let's see, it was for specifically, I believe, for the P4 test gen for Tofino. So it was related to the Tofino toolchain, but it was for P4 test gen in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was a case where it says copyright and proprietary Intel followed by an Apache license in the same source file.
Yeah.
So it was something where somebody tacked on with a tool like an Apache license, but they left the old proprietary and confidential there without realizing they did it probably. So it's easy to do this accidentally. I know.
Said script's gone wild.
Yeah, or not even gone wild, just doing what you told them to.
Yeah.
So there were only about 40 files like this last November. There's about 40 or 50 new ones in February. There's a couple pull requests open to get to change these to remove the proprietary and confidential that will hopefully be approved within a week or two, and we'll get those merged in. So, but it'd be nice to like try to keep these out in the future. Here's an exception that I think should probably continue on. P4C behavioral model, those are like and P4 runtime, those are the most active repositories. But we've got about 30 or 40 repositories in the P4Lang organization on GitHub. The ones named here in particular, we have a branch of gRPC, a fork of gRPC, of protobuf, of thrift, of mininet that have been around since about 2015 that had a few minor modifications made to help. So I believe these were created to sort of like, we didn't want to have to wait for patches to go upstream to these projects. We want to be able to make minor modifications to them and use them to build our tools. I'm not sure they're actively used by any P4Lang project today anymore. But in any case, whether they can continue in their current form or whether they become actively used or not, we don't own the copyright on these. They're forks of other people's code. They own the copyright on them. We have no legal authority or right to change the license in any of these files. They're released under their own licenses, and most of them are not Apache. So they will continue forever to be released under their own existing licenses. A minor note, maybe we want to archive these if they're not actually being used. But these are not the focus. These are like right now sort of historical vestigial baggage right now. I just wanted to mention that we should not be changing the licenses of these files.
You had a list of all of these old repositories, right?
I have a list of all the, yeah, I mean, you can go on GitHub and look up all the P4Lang repositories, yeah.
Yeah, we can maybe archive them. I think they might even be archived, maybe even make them private and just get rid of them eventually.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not actively used in building our code, yeah, I mean, at least archiving them and marking them as these are here for historical interest at most would be maybe a good idea.
They're just visual clutter. A lot of it is visual clutter,
Sure,
I guess.
I agree. My only hesitation is if somebody wants to do a little archaeology and try to build a 2018 version of code again someday, but I doubt that's a long list. That might be a set of size 0 forever. I just don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are not the main concern today. The main concern now are the files we want to keep around that are actively used that we can't or shouldn't license under Apache 2. And that's the next two slides are about. So there are a handful of test programs written in Python that import the Scapy package. Scapy is released under GPL v2, copyleft license. Everything I've found talking about this, including from the Linux Foundation folks and from others, is if you have a package released under GPL v2 and you include it or statically link it or even dynamically link it in C or import it in Python, the importing program should also be released under GPL v2. And whether or not that's like, a test case will someday resolve that that's okay for it not to be GPL 2. It's currently legally questionable, and I don't think we want to devote our limited resources to creating a test case to answer that question. That's somebody else's project, not ours. So we should do the safe thing and release them under GPL v2. Fabian and I spent about 20 hours of work in the last month, spread of the last couple of months, getting the list of such files down to 6 source files in the P4C repository. We were able to take about 20 others that were importing Scapy and they didn't need to. They weren't actually actively using it, or we made some small changes to the way it used it, so it didn't import any GPL v2 code anymore. So there's only 6.
Who did all that work, Andy? A lot of work.
Mostly Fabian and I.
Oh, good job, guys.
Yeah. I'm not trying to overstate the work. I partly wanted to put the 20 hours there, not as like a please give me money or fawn over me, but as a reminder to Fabian, this stuff isn't free. It seems small when you start it, but it kind of grows as you get into it. So like it's a reminder of like, yeah, it's not a huge task, but it's also not like a half-hour afternoon either.
Yeah.
For each hour spent, you get 1 attaboy, and when you reach 10, reset to 0.
I'm not looking for kudos. It's just like when I was younger, I would give time estimates that were like, oh, I could probably do this in 3 hours, and 10 hours later, it's like, yeah, that estimate was off, and now I know why. In this case, I didn't estimate 20 ahead of time, but I think I estimated 16, and I was really so now that I'm older, my estimates are sometimes a little bit better. And that's not to eliminate GPLv2, that's to get it down to 6 source files. The ones that remain use SCAPI features that are SCAPI is a 20-year-old project with almost as many lines of code as P4C has,
Yeah.
written by a bunch of people and over 20 years, and it's got features for creating your own custom headers in a few lines of Python code that nobody else has that I know has implemented in the same way. So these 6 GPLv2 files that we have, these test programs, use SCAPI in a way that would be difficult to avoid using SCAPI without rewriting it in some other way. When I say difficult, like the right person could probably do it in another 10 hours. It's just not something I want to work on. These are only test programs. They're only used, during CI tests or manual tests you run in your own local system. They do not get included in any P4C executables ever. So my recommendation is we leave these as is. If you want to work on it to avoid using GBLVD, feel free to do that. But if you have that kind of time, maybe there's other things you might want to work on instead to enhance P4C, P4 projects in other ways. Billy, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's realistic that there be a separate repo just for some continuous testing, like, and separate from the main P4C repo.
That's certainly possible. I don't think it's that unusual to have, like, the tool that I'm about to talk about later in this talk, called Reuse, was designed specifically because there are thousands of projects out there that have a mix of a few different licenses in a single source repo. It's normal today. It's not like an unusual thing to have a mix. So I think my recommendation is, yeah, we could put it in a separate repo, but that would be its own 10-hour hassle all by itself, I think, to change CI to do that, is my guess. Not again, the right person, maybe 2 hours, but that's my guess. It seems like a hassle that if we have good ways to track this and we're aware of it, and we try to avoid adding new ones, like the tools I'm going to talk about will make it easy to know when you're adding a file with a brand new license and not in use. It'll flag it on CI very easily, and you'll know if it's a new license being added. Or if you're using a non-Apache 2 license, you'll have to, the person committing the PR will have to know and put in that it's a non-Apache 2 license or whatever license it is on every source file in the future. So, this won't slip in accidentally, hopefully, in the future if we have the right process in place. Sorry, one other exception, eBPF programs that run on the Linux kernel. It's very common in the eBPF world to have a data plane program that runs, a small data plane program that runs in the Linux kernel, and usually much larger control plane programs that run as user space Linux processes. And it's very common for those, I've heard, to be the control plane code is proprietary or some other license. It's run as a user space Linux process. It's the copyright holder's decision what license to release that under, if they release the source at all or keep it proprietary. But even for proprietary control plane programs in eBPF, it's very common that the eBPF program itself that processes each packet and run in the kernel is released as GPLv2 because it's running in the kernel. And usually, like, there's not much secret sauce there. It's the control plane code that's like, 1,000,000 lines of code, and your data plane program's 1,000 lines of code, and there's nothing secret sauce there. Or rather, in some cases, they might even choose to put less in there and more in the control plane code to avoid putting secret sauce in the data plane program. So my recommendation is P4C eBPF backend, the output files, not part of the compiler itself, but the files that it outputs, the C code it outputs, be marked as GPLv2. And there's a handful of include files that are, I think, checked into repo that they could be GPLv2, but sometimes there's some include files that we want to include common data structures from both the data plane program and the control plane program. And so it turns out that one thing that I've seen happen in multiple cases, existing P4 repos even that have eBPF code, is you release the header files that are common to include in both as BSD 3 clause. And that's compatible with including from a GPL program, and it's compatible with including from a proprietary program. It's compatible with including from an Apache program. So BSD is like one of the most compatible things you could include from almost any other licensed project, copyleft, proprietary, or other. So, and that's only a handful of source files. It would be BSD 3 clause with this proposal.
Isn't it the case that when you compile the data plane program for eBPF, it won't even compile if it doesn't have the GPL v2 license? Like it'll just refuse to compile it. The verifier will say, or it won't run it maybe.
That's entirely possible. I haven't done so recently to know.
Yeah, maybe it's when it won't load it. It'll build it, but it won't load it, the object code. And it's not every program, but every practical program. I mean, there's certain instructions that just won't verify and load.
Yeah, if that's the case, it might be that the output programs from P4C eBPF backend already have a GPL license in them. I'm not sure.
Yes,
checked.
so the compiler option by default uses a GPL license in our compiler to generate it.
And do you recall, Fabian, if it's the loader, the verifier that simply will refuse, reject the program?
Yeah, you have to, there's some enum you have to set to that GPL license.
Yeah.
And if you don't set it, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So I think that, if we go with these recommendations, we'll have currently about 6 GPL v2 license source files in P4C, only test programs, only Python. 3 to 4 of them header files would be BSD 3 clause, and everything else would be Apache 2 in the P4C repo. And other repos would be like most other repos would be all Apache 2. It's really P4C that I've been focusing on first because it's kind of the big. I wanted to start with the biggest, hardest one rather than starting with the easiest one because the easiest ones don't present these problems. I expect a lot of the repos will be simpler than this. But I don't consider this terribly complicated. I mean, this is 10 non-Apache 2 files carefully, as long as they're carefully marked so, and we know why, that's fine. I think this is a common state of affairs for open source projects. This is not unusual. And we want and then ideally we want the Linux Foundation recommends that we have a way of tracking which files are which license, which on a per source file basis. And I think it's a reasonable, like, especially for example, it's very common for source files to be start out in one repo, but then like somebody might say, well, I want to copy those source files to this other repo. And if it's in the comments in the header, then the copyright owner and the license go with the file very easily in that use case. So one recommendation from the Linux Foundation software was to just add this SPDX license identifier. It's a comment in the source file that looks like these. And every single character of this line, there's a precise syntax so that this is a machine processable line. If it finds a line with this, there's even a syntax for, a dual use license. Apache 2 or GPL 2.0 only is a precisely defined syntax by this standard, or this de facto, this definition. I don't think we need that, but there are syntaxes for it. This is fine for source files that have comment syntax, but it won't work, for example, for JSON files, patch files, and a few other things that we have in the repo today. There's no comment syntax that you can stick in there that doesn't change the meaning of the file or the way it's used. So it wouldn't apply to those. It would only apply to source files if we do it this way. So there's another second approach that the Linux Foundation software license specialist mentioned, and I didn't notice it in an email until this past 3 weeks ago or so. And I started looking at this project there's a reuse project. Some background for it to show you that there's like what's behind it, because I hadn't heard of it before 3 weeks ago. The reuse software project, its URL is here. It's an initiative from Free Software Foundation Europe. So this is not a small organization. I think this has been around for decades now. It's got a lot of support and weight behind it. This reuse, there's an open source lint tool called Reuse. It's released as a Python package. It was released in 2017. It's got an average of 285 commits a year since 2017 and still actively maintained. It's used by over 3,000 software projects today. So this is not like a new fly-by-night kind of thing. I just wanted to give, I'm not trying to say this is not a proof that, this is a great stable thing, but like this is not something that a grad student created last month and will be going away soon, is my belief. what can it do for us? There's a reuse lint command that when you run it, so because multiple license projects are common, it proposes that you have a licenses directory at the top level, not a license file. And the licenses directory contains exactly one file per license in use in that repository. So in our case, it would have the Apache 2 license in one file in that directory. It would have the GPLv2 license in another file, and the BSD3 clause in a third file. And those are exact copies that there's a reuse download command that will download the exact text in a specific form, bit for bit of that license unmodified. So you can do a diff against the original and it's identical. And that's just sort of, they're proposing, like, try to make things machine checkable and repeatable. It also checks that every file in the repo, except for things like in the .git, directory, have an SPDX license identifier line, as I mentioned previously, and it's one of the licenses in that directory. And either it has a traditional copyright notice like this, or it has this kind of copyright notice, which is a new style proposed by this SPDX project. Either one of those is acceptable. There's no reason, if you have one of these already and it's fine, there's no reason to replace it with a new style one. And there's a reuse annotate command that if a source file doesn't have these two things in it, you give it a few command line options like who should the copyright holder be, what should the license be, and it will add these comments for you. And it can do it for many files at once or a single one. Now there's a bunch of, I mentioned, for example, JSON files. Some text files don't have a comment syntax. It's a design choice by JSON not to have a comment syntax on purpose. They didn't want people to start adding metadata in comment syntaxes and not put it in regular data. So here's an example of a file called, so there's a file called reuse.2ml. 2ml is one of the sort of Yang, family of JSON, Yang, a bunch of other similar sort of text data file formats with precisely defined syntaxes and open source tools for manipulating them, reading them, and processing them. Reuse 2ml file, basically, this is the description of one particular file. Here's the path, here's the copyright, and here's the license. And so it's not in that file. It's in this separate top-level reuse.2ml file describing here's the copyright and license in that file. So that's the next best thing, is you know where in the project to find the copyright and license for that file, even though it's not in the file itself. I haven't found a particular reuse command that will add these lines for you, but it wouldn't be hard to make one. That I think I could do in 30 minutes, but it'd probably take 3 hours. So here's like a survey question for you, and sorry I've run so close up to the wire here on time, and you don't have to answer today. I'm not planning to do this month. I still want to talk to the intellectual property lawyers, but the questions for you are, given this description, is there anything else you'd like to know before you'd be interested in maybe using something like this reuse lint tool for P4Lang projects? Do you have any strong reservations that you already know about? Or do you have questions that you'd like to learn the answer to before you think that would be a good idea? And this is under the assumption that, we have good documentation saying the next time CI fails because this tool fails, we'll have nice clear instructions written up of what do you do about it, with as much automation for adding new licenses to files as possible. So if you have any thoughts on that right away, feel free to shout them out, or if not, yeah, follow up later. And given the time, I'll let people think about that for a minute. Oh, the other thing, again, I'll check this with an intellectual property lawyer, but also check with Michelle Roth, and maybe Denise knows. One proposal is, given that we have thousands of files that don't have an explicit copyright notice today, if we were going to add a copyright notice to them, we need to come up with who's the copyright holder and what year is it, or omit the year. And so for the copyright holder, one proposal is a line like, copyright, maybe a year, contributors to the P4 project, as opposed to an individual or company name. And that would be the default choice if any new file somebody adds in a pull request that says copyright year by VMware or Cisco or Intel is free to do so, and we wouldn't stop them. But if if you didn't have a preference or didn't want your name on there as an individual contributor to the P4 project, or whatever name besides P4 project would be the default choice that we'd recommend. And so that's a good question for the governance board to make sure that's, you know, the P4 project is the right name to use legally. And I'll check with Michelle on that, and then I'll check with the intellectual property lawyers. But they've recommended a phrase like this with the right name for the organization. Any first thoughts or questions on any of that? That's the end of my presentation. Or any other topics you wanted to mention briefly before the end of our meeting today? Okay. Good to see everybody. See you next month, I hope. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.